Bonjour, welcome to Wahsa Distance Education Center's radio Zoom classes. This is MBF3C, grade 11 college math, and I am the teacher Bronwyn Slate. If you'd like to participate live today, you are welcome to call the Wahsa studio at 1-800-465-7144 or 737-4017. You can listen through the radio at 91.9 FM or through the television at Bell Express U channel 972. You're always welcome to join me live through the Zoom channel. You can have the link is available from me, your teacher, and also from your DEC. Practices are scheduled on Monday through Thursday from 11 till 12 in the morning. And we are now in week 7 of our 9-week course. So we're getting very close to the end. At this point, you should be submitting some work. So a reminder of what work to submit. The support questions, the one in your booklet marked with the pencil icon, are not for marking. They are just practice, the ones you can decide how much and which ones to do. If you're understanding a concept, feel free to skip questions and spend your time on parts that are challenging. If you need more practice, then let me know and I can send you more practice. The answers are in the back of the book, so you can check your work to make sure you're on track. However, mistakes have been found, so if anything is not lining up or making sense, let me know and we can check to see if that's an error in the booklet. The key questions, the ones marked with the little key icon, are the marked questions, the one to submit. So please do all of those questions, showing all of your work, your steps, and your thinking so that I can give you credit for everything that you understand. And that also helps me understand where you might be making errors or things might not be working so that I can help correct you and help you understand further. How to submit your work for marking? There's 3 methods. The first method is to scan your work in and send it in electronically. So you can scan all of your work together through, if you have a smartphone, through the iPhone's Notes app or through the Android Google Drive app. If you don't know how to do that and you want to learn, let me know and I can show you. However, if just taking a picture makes more sense, you can do that as well. Then you can send your work to either through email at studentwork@nnec.on.ca and then CC it to me at bronwyn.slate.nnec.on.ca. Or you can send it to me through Facebook Messenger at bslatewahsa. The second method is to drop your work off right in Sioux Lookout. We have an outdoor mailbox next to our side entrance at 74 Front Street. We're the big red building next to the post office, and there's a small white mailbox next to our side door. We are continuing to work remotely, so it may take me a couple of days to actually get in there and pick it up, but I'll get it back to you as soon as I can. Method 3 is to hand your work into your DEC. Your DEC can then send it through the Express or fax it to 807-737-1732 or toll-free fax to 1-800-463-7852. If you have any questions or struggling with anything, any concerns, please contact me. This is what I'm here for. My email address is bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE@n.ca. You can get a hold of me through Facebook at bslatewahsa. You can call and leave a message for me at the main office and I'll return your call. The number there is 807-737-1488 or toll-free 1-800-667-3703. My office hours currently are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Connecting with me through social media, all of our lessons are uploaded shortly after airing on YouTube, and then I share them on Facebook. So that's a great way to access the replays of the videos and the lessons. So they're both named B Slate Wahsa. And if you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, then it's just really easy access to all of our lessons. There's also short videos explaining common errors and confusing concepts on my YouTube channel. And I add those as I'm noticing things that students are struggling with. I add new videos as I can. Math is an incredibly visual subject, both in organization, but also in conceptual, just really understanding what's going on. Being able to see what I'm talking about is really, really useful. So watching the videos is going to set you up for the most success. You could always join me live through the Zoom link, even without asking me questions, but just watching, that's totally fine. Or connecting to the YouTube channel is really going to mean that you're really able to understand the most. If you don't have access to reliable internet, let me know and I can send you a USB key or something that has all of our recordings on it so that you can still access the visuals and not just be listening through the audio. All right, we're on day 24 of our course and we're diving into lesson 16, sampling data. This is the beginning of unit 4. So we've done unit 1 through 3, and this is our last unit. So our learning goals are that at the end of this lesson, you can say, I will understand the difference between population and sample, and I will be able to describe and compare sampling techniques. Success criteria. So knowing that you've met the learning goals, because you can say, I can distinguish between population and sample, and I can identify 6 different sampling techniques and the benefits and the challenges of each. All right, so let's first activate our brain and do a little bit of mental math and go from there. So we know that I'm not a fan of the mad minutes that many of us experienced in elementary school. They were drill and kill. They didn't help us develop strategies. They just mostly stressed many folks out. So instead of focusing on that philosophy of strategy, we work on developing actual strategies that we can transfer to different situations and help us think through numbers and getting more comfortable with them. So today's question is 25 times 48. And we're going to use the strategy of doubling and halving. So 25 times 48 is not a fact that I have memorized. They're big numbers, they're daunting. So the strategy of doubling and halving, well, 25, I know I can double it if I times it by 2 to 50, and that's manageable. And 48, if I divide that by 2, I get 24. Okay, so maybe I'm getting to friendlier numbers. I don't feel totally like they're friendly yet, but if I go, I can do it again. So I can double 50. So I times that by 2 to 100. And I can have 24. And that's, oops, I bet, have it. So divide by 2, it equals 12. It's not, I'm not dividing. So if I have 24, so divided by 2, I get 12. Well, now if I look at that, I can say from right there, I know, okay, well, 100 times 12 is fairly easy. I can just use the fact that I know that if I times something by 100, I'm increasing it by a place value by up to the hundreds. So that's going to be 1200. So 100 times 12 is 1200. So that means that by the same pattern, the same ratio, because I've just doubled half my numbers or I've doubled some of my numbers and the other ones I've halved. So it means I'm still having the same ratio. So 25 times 48 is also going to be 1200. That is a lot more accessible than trying to figure out what 25 times 48 is. So that's one strategy that we can use. All right, mine's on. Let's engage in some prior learning because we're talking about some new concepts today. So we're going to talk about statistics. This last unit is about statistics. It's a word that I often fumble on my tongue. So where is that in our lives? So the study of statistics is a collection, analysis, interpretation of data, as well as the effective communication and presentation of results relying on this data. So we're gathering information and we're communicating this information. So statistics shape our understanding of the world around us. It isn't always numbers and graphs, but also can be words and pictures. So I'm going to show you a few examples of where it's words and pictures of how collecting this information and then communicating it back to the world is how we pick up that information. So I have a few headlines from papers around the world, from media around the world. And so this one I have, which is the Express, which is in the UK, I believe, where we have a picture of Kate and Meghan Markle. So I don't know what their terms are in the UK, but wedded royalty. So Kate's morning sickness cure, Prince William gifted an avocado for pregnant Duchess. So there's sitting this in terms of like situating that having an avocado is a beneficial and a great solution for Kate's morning sickness. And then the other side is Meghan Markle's beloved avocado linked to human rights abuse and drought. So they're situating the same thing, an avocado, as a negative and relating it to Meghan Markle. So even though we don't have any numbers here or graphs, we can see that collecting this information is skewing our perspective in terms of sort of looking really positive at Kate Middleton and looking really negative at Meghan Markle. And there's analysis about that being racism within our media. So that's just an interesting sort of, this is how our use of our statistics is done. So then we also have, there's a trend of changing headlines because of the way that that information is skewed. So this graphic has, the original headline was, "Woman was flirty and very friendly in the hours before she was allegedly raped." And this has been crossed off and changed to, "Man accused of rape says alleged victim chatted to people at party." So repositioning the phrasing, instead of focusing on the woman's behavior who was assaulted, and then situating in terms of that the man who assaulted this woman, his perspective of him saying that she was chatty and that meant something. So just there's violence and representation in the women in the media is really skewed. And so once again, statistics are often used to skew this information and to make it look one way opposed to presenting the whole story or presenting the story of the marginalized population. The third one we have is, the original headline is, "Adult children are costing many parents their retirement savings." And so then that's been changed to, "Young adults are being forced to rely on help from parents to survive due to overwhelming student loan debt and crippling low wages." So instead of focusing on blaming youth for having to rely on their parents and costing their parents money, but saying that this is a situation in our world because we have too much student debt, and we have low wages, and so we don't have a living wage for youth and for young adults. So people are coming out of university or college or post-secondary and have so much debt and can't afford to live, so they're relying on their parents. And that's not because of them being lazy or bad people, but because of the situation of our world. And then finally, I have two pictures of the photos released by the police to the media of two young men. One is a white man who is very setting up in a suit and tie and very smiley in the colored picture. And then we have a black and white picture of a black young man who is in a hoodie, and it looks like sort of your stereotypical mugshot, though it's not in the police station. The white man was caught in the act of raping an unconscious woman, but if you look at the picture, he looks friendly and lovely. And the black man was murdered after buying snacks from the store. The black man is Trayvon Martin. And so the way that we present that information is that we look at those images and we have preconceived ideas of who these people are, and we don't necessarily take account into what their actual actions are and what actually happened to them. And that's really problematic. So again, that's all of the ways that statistics show up in our lives that aren't necessarily looking at all the numbers or looking at graphing data, but that they do impact the way that we see the world around us. And that's just what I wanted to show with those headlines. All right, so let's activate some learning and explore some new concepts and dive into our actual things that are going into our booklet. So when will we use this in real life? Well, I believe that knowledge is power. So I think that this is something that impacts our lives. The way that we see the world around us impacts our lives constantly and impacts those around us. And so I think it's really important to understand where this information is coming from and how it's manipulated and presented to us. So here we have some graphs and numbers to see the way that this also shows up. So we have a graph of the trend of COVID in Ontario over the past 2 years. And so you can see the rises and falls. And so being able to understand what's going on in that graph is really, really important to be able to protect yourself and your family. We also have a map and some data about Aboriginal languages in Canada and how the rise and the fall of that and where those languages are spoken. So that can be really powerful information. We also have another map that shows us about poverty and children's poverty in Canada. And this map shows us the numbers for Indigenous children as well as non-Indigenous children. And we can see that just by a quick look at the graph, the poverty rates for Indigenous children is much higher consistently across the country than for non-Indigenous children. And that's really problematic. And so we can use that information to hopefully better change that. And then we also have a chart, a different bar chart that shows us the age specifics of suicide rates in First Nation males living on reserve and non-Indigenous males in Canada. So again, comparing that information and seeing that the First Nation males living on reserve have a much higher rate of suicide and how problematic that is. So this is really powerful information for us to understand so that we can be implementing changes in our country and in our world to protect those marginalized populations and to protect those people who deserve better. All right, so we need to have some statistics vocabulary to understand what we're talking about. So population, the group of items or individuals being considered. And this is on page 2 of your IL book, this language, these words. So sampling is that when we take a small group of items or individuals chosen to represent the total population. So we go from having the population, which is everybody, and when we sample a group of people, we are taking a piece of that, a group of those of that larger population. And in theory, we are representing the entire population. Primary source data is data collected directly by the person or the group who will use the information. So if you go out and ask people questions, then you are getting primary sources of information. Secondary source data is the data that's already been collected and is made readily available to the public. So if you're reading a report or collecting information from Stats Canada, that's all secondary source information because someone else gathered that information and then is presenting it to you. And then a census is a survey of the entire population. So a census is when we ask everyone information opposed to just taking a sample to gather information. All right, so asking why is sampling necessary? So it's time consuming to survey the entire population. It's a lot to try to census everybody, to do a census and collect information from everyone. It's a lot to process the data, and it's difficult to gather information from the entire population. So instead, we often sample instead of trying to ask every single person. But what makes a good sample? So a representative of the whole population is what makes a good sample. We don't just want information, for example, from Toronto. We don't want just with people in Toronto listening to the questions and answering for everyone in Canada, because that's going to be really skewed the same way that we can't just ask everyone in Sioux Lookout to answer questions and then that's going to transfer for the entire country. That's not realistic. It needs to represent the whole population. A bias sample is when a sample of the population is not representative of the whole population. So again, if we just sampled Toronto, that would be biased. If we are asking about entire Ontario or Canada experience, if we're just asking about Toronto, that would be okay. But if we're asking about the whole country, then that's not going to be a well representation. So here's a little graphic that shows a lot of people. We have people who are just little icons that are black and little icons that are orange. And if we sample just the orange people, which are a small population, percent of that population, that's not going to give us a true representation of the whole story. We need to have a combination of both the little black icons and little orange. So a reliable survey is if the results can be duplicated in another survey. So that means that if someone else were to ask the same questions or ask similar questions, you're still going to get the same information. Then we're talking about how to select a sample. So a sample of the population is representative if it has the same characteristics as the whole population. The sample is random if every member has an equal chance of being selected. And that's what we're going to look into a little bit more in this lesson, is sampling and how we choose different ways that we can choose to ask people questions in order to gather information. All right, so types of sampling. This is on page 3 of your IL book. So there's 6 different types. The first one we're going to look at is called simple random sampling. And this means that every member of the population has an equal chance of being selected. So we have our whole group of our whole population, our whole group of people, and we randomly pick a certain number. So often this is like done like pulling a name out of a hat in smaller, like in a classroom or in a group of people. Or this can also be done with researchers. If you have a list of the telephone numbers from a database with all cell phone numbers and landlines, using a random number generator can randomly call numbers. Then it just is random. There's no setup of how it's done. It's just random. And that would be a simple random search. So the pros of this is that the sample should represent the target population and eliminate sampling bias. But however, the cons are that it's very difficult to achieve. It takes a lot of money, time, and effort. And because of systematic barriers, that there can be resulting in bias sampling under the guise that it's being unbiased. So for my example of having a list of telephone numbers, well, not every single person or adult in Canada has a telephone, has a cell phone or a landline or has access to that. There's the underhoused populations, so also known as the homeless population, that might not have a phone and be able to access and share their voice. So you have to be really careful in terms of saying that this is perfect, this is a perfect system, and you might not actually have, every person might not actually have equal opportunity to answer the questions and have their voices heard. So the second type is sampling. And this is when every member of the population is listed with a number, but instead of randomly generating numbers, the individuals are chosen at regular intervals. So it's like every first person, every 10th person, every 100th person, every third person, every 66th person, whatever, is chosen to answer the survey or to be interviewed. So for example, all employees of a company are listed in alphabetical order. Then from the first 10 numbers, you randomly select a starting point, say number 6. And from 6 onwards, every 10th person on the list is selected. So 6, 16, 26, 36, and so on until you end up with a sample of 100 people. So that's systematic. You're following a system. The pros are that the sampling should represent the target population because we're still taking collection from everybody, and it should eliminate sampling bias. And it's simpler to execute than random sampling. The sampling method is not possible without a list of all members of the population. So again, if you are trying to get information from everyone, you still need a list. You need something that has that can track every single person and organize that information, which can be challenging. All right, number 3, cluster sample. So this involves dividing the population into subgroups, and then each subgroup should have a similar characteristics to the whole sample. And then instead of sampling individuals from each subgroup, you just select an entire subgroup. So for example, if you want to know how many high school students in Northwestern Ontario drank alcohol last year, you could study this issue by taking a list of all the high schools in the area and randomly selecting a portion of schools, the clusters. Then you could survey the students within the selected schools. So instead of having to get students to answer questions from Kenora, from Dryden, from Sioux Lookout, from KI, from Casablanca High School, then instead of doing it so that you're trying to access everybody from all the schools, then you maybe pick a couple of schools and then you just survey the students at those schools. So the pros, it's good for dealing with large and dispersed populations, and it's fast and efficient. Instead of having to go to everywhere, you just pick a couple. The con, that there's a risk of error in the sample. So there could be substantial differences between clusters. It's difficult to guarantee that the sample clusters are really representative of the whole population. So your answers in Kenora might be different than Sioux Lookout, that might be different than Casablanca, etc. So you have to make sure that your clusters really are actually representative of the whole population and not going to skew your information. Number 4, random sample. So the population is divided into subgroups. A random sample is selected from each subgroup proportional to the size of that subgroup. So for example, a company has 800 female employees and 200 male employees. We want to ensure that the sample reflects the gender balance of the company. So we sort the population into two strata, two groups based on gender. Then we use random sampling on each group, selecting 80 women and 20 men, which gives us a representation sample of 100 people. So the strata are the two groups, and then we pick proportional to the groups. So the larger groups has more people and the smaller group has less people. The pros is that it should be highly representative of the target population, and therefore we can generalize the results obtained because we're not just sampling from everybody. We're getting, there's more, in this example, there's more women, and therefore we're going to have more women voices. Whereas if we just randomly sampled, we couldn't guarantee that we would get more of the voices of the people who there actually are more people. That gathering this information is extremely time consuming and difficult to do because you have to create those strata. And also the subgroups are defined by surveyors and might not accurately represent the population. So for this example, it's problematic to just say female and male employees. That ignores it puts gender within a binary and ignores the vast complex identities that many folks have. So that being defined by someone external is really problematic. And so then we might not actually get, again, representative, accurate information from the group. Sample type 5 is convenience sample. So this includes only those individuals who are most accessible and available to participate in the study. So for example, you are researching opinions about services available in Indigenous communities, and you ask your family members to complete a survey on the topic. This is convenient, a convenient way to gather data, but as you only survey people in your family, this is not going to represent all Indigenous communities. Pros, it's an easy and inexpensive way to gather initial data. It's pretty straightforward. You're asking people who you have access to. The cons is that there's no way to tell if the sample is being representative of the population. So you can't produce generalizable results. So for example, if I, as a white person, ask my family, that's going to be different information than if an Indigenous person asks their family. You're going to have different knowledge and access to information than I do. So it's really can be dangerous to just asking people who have a similar background and similar knowledge as you, because you're not going to get a diverse experience and many voices are not going to be heard. So then 6 is self-selected, or also known as voluntary sample. And this is when interested people usually take part by themselves by filling in some sort of survey forms. So people volunteer, they choose themselves to actually answer the questions or be part of the study. So for example, after a business provides a service or good, they often ask customers to report on their satisfaction. Because the business is asking all customers to volunteer their thoughts, the sample is voluntary and susceptible to bias. So the pros, this is a quick way and easy for choosing participants. Just whoever wants to do it does it. And the cons is it's always going to be at least somewhat biased, as people will inherently be more likely to volunteer than others. So if you're looking at a business, again, is that folks who either absolutely loved an experience and really want to rave about it are probably going to report on their satisfaction, or if they had a really, really awful experience, they're probably going to report on having an awful experience. So it's kind of the extremes. The folks in the middle are going to be kind of like, very often are going to be not necessarily really care and therefore not complete a survey. So that's a little bit tricky. All right, so those are our 6 types of sampling. So let's do some examples about figuring out what type of sampling would be best for the scenarios and give a reasoning. With these sorts of questions, there might be a different way that you might choose a different way than what I choose. As long as you justify your reason, justify why you picked that sampling method, and if it's accurate to what the sampling method is, then I am likely to accept your answer, because you have to back up your reasons. We don't have to agree, we don't have to have the same exact thoughts, but we need to be able to justify and back up why we made those decisions, and that's what's the important thing that we're developing. So every 152nd person in the phone book is called to do a telephone survey about their political views. So I believe that this is systematic because every 152nd person from the list was picked. So we have a systematic method of picking people. Okay. Scenario 2, Josh asks only his hockey buddies about which sport is the best. Well, I think this is convenience because Josh has only his hockey friends. So they're going to probably have one particular idea of what sport is best. And that is going to potentially skew our information. Third scenario, a company that makes shampoo asks 50 people with coily hair, 50 people with curly hair, 50 people with wavy hair, and 50 people with straight hair about their hair products. So this is stratified. People of various hair types are the subgroups, and they are asked. So it's a range of people with various hair types. Okay, scenario 4. In an apartment building, the tenants on floors 2, 5, 9, and 14 are selected to participate in a survey. So this is cluster. All the people living on the 4 floors of an apartment building with at least 14 floors are surveyed. So instead of surveying some people on all the different floors, picking those such strata, those clusters, to just survey those folks. Scenario number 5, the entire population of the inhabitants of a small community, and there's a small sample, are selected at random. So this is just getting a small group of people that were selected at random from the entire population of the community that you're asking about. 6th scenario, a Facebook survey where participants are asked whether they like using Facebook or not. So this is going to be self-selected or voluntary. People on Facebook were asked about Facebook. So they're going to be the only ones who are going to volunteer their information. It's not going to be about other people, and you can choose not to answer the questions if you wanted to. All right, so in your IL book on page 2 and 4, questions 1 and 2 are the support questions. If you'd like to pause the video and do some practice now, this is a great time. Consolidate all the learning that we've done today and then do some practice questions. So the highlights of lesson 16 for sampling data were, first we had our statistical vocabulary. So most importantly was population and sample. So knowing that population is the entire group of people and a sample is just a small portion of that. And then there are 6 types of sampling. So we had simple random sampling, systematic, cluster, stratified, convenience, and self-selected. So you need to know the difference between those and when it might be most appropriate to use those different types of sampling. All right, so our success criteria is that you can, 1, distinguish between population and sample. Hopefully you can do that. And 2, you can identify the 6 different sampling techniques, and then also the benefits and challenges of each of them, the pros and cons of each of them. All right, let's do some practice questions. So a local high school has 600 students in grade 9, 400 in grade 10, 300 in grade 11, and 200 in grade 12. A sample of 100 students is used to choose which brand of chocolate bars should be sold in the vending machines. How many of the 100 surveys should be handed out to each grade? So I think that for this question, the one that makes the most sense is to use the stratified method. So we could just randomly pick a whole bunch of people, but we might end up picking a lot. We could pick, there's 600 grade 9 students, so we could end up picking a lot of grade 9 students and not get any grade 12 students because there's only 200 of them. Or we could get a big opinion randomly, because it's random. We could get a lot of opinions from, say, the grade 11 students. There's 300 of them, and maybe we don't hardly get any opinions from the grade 9 students, and there's the most of them. They might be the ones who are going to buy the most chocolate bars. So doing a stratified sample means that we're going to get proportional representation of each of those groups, and therefore that's going to be more likely to represent the opinions of the group as a whole. So to figure out, we first need to figure out our total. How many students do we have so that we can figure out our proportion? So we have 600 grade 9s plus 400 grade 10s plus 300 grade 11s plus 200 grade 12s. So 600 plus 400 is 1,000. 300 plus 200 is 500. So 1,000 plus 500 is 1,500. So that's our total school population. Not necessarily representative of our local area. That's pretty big, but just their friendly numbers. So we'll go with it. So now we need to figure out what percentages of each of those in order to figure out how many of our 100 students we should have. So grade 9. So to figure out our percentage, how many we should pick. So we say, okay, so that's 600 out of 1,500. And so we are going to divide that to figure out that 600 divided by 1,500 is 0.4. So that's like saying 40% of our students should be from grade 9. So grade 10, again, we're going to do 400 divided by 1,500, which is 400, just using my calculator, is 0.266 repeated. So we're going to say that that's 27%. Grade 11 is 300 out of 1,500. So that's 0.333 repeated. So we're going to say 33%. And grade 12 is 200 out of 1,500. And that is 0.133 repeated. So we're going to say 13%. Feels like that doesn't add up to 100%. One wrong. Yes, I did this one wrong. My bad. Just thinking that it was 1/3, but it's not. 300 divided by 1,500 is 0.2, which is 20%. That looks like it's going to now add up to 100%. 20, 60, yeah, 100. Okay, so then because we have a sample of 100 students is what we're looking for. For each of these, we would multiply the percentage by 100. So for grade 9, we do 40% times 100, which is just 40. So because we're looking for a sample of 100 students, we end up with just our percentages. So that is a little bit straighter forward. If it wasn't 100 students, then it would be a little bit different. But so we have 40 students. For grade 10, we have 27% times 100, which is 7 students. For grade 11, we have 20% should be grade 11 students. So that's 20 students. And for grade 12, we get 13%, which is 13 students. So we see that we have 40 students. We have the most grade 9, which makes sense because we have in the school is mostly made up of grade 9 students. And then as we get less students in each of the grades, we have less students in the survey. And that's how we would pick, that's how we would do a stratified. So this is stratified sample. Okay, next question. 2, in order to find out which videos are the most popular watched on YouTube, a survey was sent out to a number of teenagers. A, what are some advantages of using a survey to collect this data? So a survey means that you're asking questions, and so you can really narrow down your the information they're looking for. So you can really narrow your focus. Your information. And then also a survey is usually fairly accessible in terms of getting people to actually answer, opposed to like doing interviews or having people write essays or things like that. So what are some, part B, what are some disadvantages to this method? So there's disadvantages are that you might miss information because you might not ask the right questions. So developing your questions is really important. And there's no guarantee that people will actually answer it. Guarantee is not a word I like to spell. I don't know how to spell guarantee. Guarantee. People will answer it. Sorry. For those of you watching my video, that's spelled wrong. My words. So part C, what would be another way to gather some information, the same information? Oh, also you're only asking teenagers. So that isn't, YouTube might not be the way that you're narrowing your population sample. So that might not be the right population to be asking. Again, you can only, because you're talking, just asking teenagers, you can only say that this is about teenagers. So again, there isn't necessarily one right answer. As you can see, there's various directions you could take these questions in, as long as you justify and explain why you're saying that, which I'm doing orally instead of writing it all out. So you might need to write more information down here than what I'm doing right now. So what would be another way to get the same information? So if you want to find out about videos, then maybe you don't want to just focus on YouTube. Maybe you want to ask in general, ask about other platforms. This doesn't talk about TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram. And maybe there's more videos there that folks watch. Maybe you want to expand the demographic of your sample. So ask people of different ages, depending on what you're looking for. It really depends on what you're trying to gather, what information you're trying to gather, and why you're trying to gather that to really focus who you're going to ask and how you're going to ask them. All right, and number 3, a school board receives a load of 10,000 graphing calculators to pass out to their high schools. They were concerned with the state of the delivery and therefore with a number of defective calculators. They decided to check them out. So the first 20 calculators were checked out and they all worked perfectly fine. So it seems like they're good to go. Then they did a second test and 100 calculators were tested and 2 of them were broken. So that's not so great. And then they did a third test of 1,000 were tested and 15 were broken. So the question is, after the first test, would it be fair to say that none of the calculators were broken? Why or why not? So in the first test, we had, in terms of the calculators, we had 0 out of 20 were broken. So 0% were broken. So with the first test, it looks like they're all perfectly fine. But in the second test, we had 2 out of 100. So now we have 2% were broken. And the third test, we had 15 out of 1,000. And so 15 out of 1,000 means that we have 0.015% broken. So saying that there are none broken, which is what the first test says, it would not be fair to say it's not accurate. So the first test was not accurate because it implied and that's not true. So this shows that having a small sample, so only 20 calculators out of 10,000 calculators, is not a big enough sample to get accurate information. We needed to have a larger percentage to find out more accurate information about the whole group. So that's really important to make sure that that sample was not a well representation of the whole group, the whole population. Right, and then number 4, Gelman's Rent All want to see if they should open a second shop at a neighboring plaza. They conduct a poll by leaving sheets at the entrance of the plaza and asking people to fill them in. So what type of sample is this? So I would say that this is voluntary or self-selected, because people are choosing if they're going to oops, sorry, my bad. Just not my day. If they're going to do the survey or not. So it's self-selected. And what are some of the pros of this method? So they are asking people at the plaza where they want to open a second location. So at the location, if they ask people at the location where they currently are, that might not be useful information. If they're asking where they want to go, that's probably more useful information. They are probably because they're self-selected, people who would actually use the store are going to tell them. So self-selected is probably going to get information about whether or not people would actually use the service. So if they don't get any responses, then that's getting the information. Nobody cares. Nobody wants that services and can take the time out of their time to do it. If they get lots of answers, then that gives them information. So even if they don't get information, if they don't get written information, they still actually get information about whether or not it is a good place for their service. So again, these questions are a little bit different than what we've been doing. It's still math, but we are having to explain more about our thinking, and we're analyzing information opposed to just doing calculations. Your answers may be completely different than other folks, but you really just need to justify and explain what your thinking was. That's really important. All right, and that is, we are done for today in terms of lesson 16. So as always, if you have any questions, please contact me. Please reach out. My phone number is 807-737-1488 or 1-800-667-3703. Leave a message there at the front desk or whoever answers the phone, and I will get back to you. It's best to let me know when is a good time to reach you, so that we don't just keep playing phone tag back and forth. Emailing me is a little bit more direct. So that comes, please send me an email at bronwyn.slate, which is spelled BRONWYN.SLATE @nnec.on.ca. Also connecting with me through Facebook, I answer fairly quickly, which is my name there is B Slate Wahsa. This lesson will be uploaded shortly this afternoon to YouTube, where my name there is B Slate Wahsa as well. So you can access and replay, go through those different sampling types again, which might be, it's a little bit easy to mix them up. So going back over them and looking at, there's some graphics and breaking down the pros and cons is really helpful. My office hours for this term are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So that's the time when I will get back to you most quickly, but otherwise I'll get back to you the next day if you have to connect with me in the evening, which is completely understandable. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you have a lovely day and enjoying some spring weather. Miigwech.